a persuader. So let's talk about the art of persuasion and what all it entails. Let me give it to you. Here's number one. Be a good storyteller. If you're involved in a company that deals in numbers and business and products and volume of business, make sure you translate all the business into stories. Sometimes it's easy to say, we did $10 million in business last month. And then we forget the stories that are involved in that 10 million. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Become story conscious as well as figure conscious. How many stories does $10 million represent? And if you're only interested in the numbers and not the stories, you'll be limited in your future skills of communication. Try to translate activity and business and volume and money and numbers into people's lives and stories and who all is involved in the transactions. Okay? Now here's another key. Become your own best storyteller. Learn to tell your own story. Whether it's identification, logic, solutions. Be a student of your own life. It's so important to go back over your own life. It's good to review at the end of the day your experiences of the day. We call it learning to reflect. One of the keys of making the past more valuable to invest it in the future is learning how to reflect. And let me give you some good times to reflect. One is at the end of the day. Take a few minutes at the end of the day and go back over your day. Who did you see and who did you meet and who did you talk to and what happened? Why did they say what they said and why did you say what you said? We call it running the tapes again. And if you'll take a few minutes at the end of a day and run the tapes of the day again, that day will take a more important place in your equity future. You'll be able to draw from that day. But if you casually go through the day, and then if you casually miss the opportunity to lock that day into your consciousness, sure enough, at some future time when you could have drawn from that experience, it won't be available. Here's how to lock in your past and make it more of an equity. Number two, take a few hours at the end of the week to go back over a week. A week is a pretty good chunk of time. The sights and the sounds and the colors and the people and the decisions and the mistakes and the errors and the successes. Just go back and review that week and let that week take a more powerful place in your awareness. A half a day at the end of the month. A month is really a good chunk of time. We wouldn't let a company go by without taking a look at least in 30 days. You can't be casual about taking a look. Somebody says, well, let's let the company go a few years and then we'll take a look. Say, no, you can't wait a few years. That would be too late. You could be so far off track. Now, I'm asking you not to let your life go more than about 30 days without taking a serious look at the numbers and what you've done and what you've said and how you've grown and your experiences, so that one more 30-day period takes a stronger place in your life. Take a weekend at the end of the year called Time to Reflect. Why? To make the past more valuable. If you treat it so, experiences can become commodity, currency, coin. Now, why try to make the past more valuable? Here's the simple answer: to invest it in the future. When my father was about to turn 76 years old, I said to him, dear Father, can you imagine the incredible experience that's waiting for you to gather up the last 75 years of your life and invest them into your 76th? See, that's a lot different awareness than just trying to make it through one more year. Let me offer you this challenge: to gather up more of your past and invest it in your future. And part of it is studying your own story, because your own story could be so powerful in identifying and offering answers and solutions. No telling what, if you took a little time, you could uncover that you just haven't talked about for a long time. If you were to dig back, no telling what additional stories and experiences you could reawaken, so that when the opportunity came, you could draw from that experience and invest it into that conversation, and no telling who you could touch. And without it, it might be a touch you couldn't make and a reach for which you're too short. Stories, your story, other people's stories. What a great way to illustrate fact and ideas and philosophy is to use the stories of life, because that's the real stuff of life, the stories of life. All right, here's number two in the art of persuasion. Accurate facts. Accurate facts. We call it dealing in truth. Accuracy is very important. Here's why. It builds credibility. Credibility starts to weaken if you mess with the facts, the truth, the correct numbers. Now, everybody will give you room for what we call an unintentional error in dealing in facts. Now, see, if my watch says about 7:28, but if you were to ask me what time is it, and I was to say it's 7:30, you would allow me to be a couple of minutes off, right? If I said it was 7:30, but accurately, really, truthfully, it was 7:28, you would give me that error to just quickly say 7:30, right? You would say, you didn't mean to mess up my life, right? By leading me astray with this erroneous information that it was 7:30 when really it was only 7:28. Now, there are times and occasions when you may have to be precise, and it may be a life and death matter, who knows. But in generally speaking, people will give you room for making what we call an unintentional error in stating what we call the truth. But beyond a sort of reasonableness of unintentional error, an area that is what we call in higher circles unacceptable. Some people deal in exaggeration, and it starts to destroy their credibility. If you're giving testimony in a trial, and you're on the witness stand, if they catch you in one lie, guess what they do with the rest of your testimony? They throw it all away. Why? You have destroyed your credibility. The guy says, well, no, I only lied just that one time. Well, how are we going to believe that? All it takes is one to now weaken your whole testimony, right? So here's part of the key in the art of persuasion. Dealing in truth. Dealing in fact. Here's what we call true sophistication. A total absence of exaggeration. Why? It's unnecessary to the sophisticated. Here's what we call exaggeration. The childish attempt to make up for lack of self-worth. If you don't feel adequate, more often than not you tend to deal in exaggerations, to make up in numbers what you may lack in character, or what you lack in substance, or what you lack in confidence. But if you start building character and confidence and precision of thinking and decision-making, and you have a sense of growing worth and value, you don't mind dealing in absolute truth and accuracy, because that's what counts. Here's the next key. Better understated than overstated. I have a book called Seasons of Life, and it's got my picture in it. And it isn't the best picture. You know, the book came out about 3 years ago. I published it myself. Every once in a while somebody says, Mr. Rohn, this picture of you in this book, Seasons of Life, is not the greatest picture of you. I said, I know, that's why it's in there. So that when I show up, I'll look better than the picture. Right, a lot of people use these glamour Hollywood shots, right? And when they show up in person, they look a little used around the edges, right? I'd rather have people surprised on the upside than surprised on the disappointing side. If you're working with people, let me give you one of the greatest clues I've learned. When you're working with people, let them find out it was more than you promised, and let them find out it was easier than you said. Later, you always want people to be surprised that it's more than you promised, and it's easier than you said. Key here, learn to trust the truth. If the truth isn't enough, then all you have to do is become stronger yourself in presenting the truth. All right, number one was stories. Number two, accuracy, facts, telling the truth. Sometimes you never know who's going to be around to check the accuracy of your stories. In one of my sessions on the weekend, in our leadership series, I was talking about a murder trial I attended many, many years ago in Houston, Texas. And I was describing this murder trial and the scene, and the lawyer who turned down the case. Then they hired another lawyer to defend this black man who had killed a bus driver. And I'm going through this whole scene. And somebody told me it was going to be quite a dramatic trial and I should go. And I happened to be in the area, so I went to this murder trial. I was there every day. And the lawyer was so brilliant. This black lawyer from Dallas was so brilliant. I was swept away by his language and his style and his uniqueness. He had the whole courtroom mesmerized. So I'm telling this whole story for some illustration I was using. And then I finished the story and I started moving on, and it was, getting close to having a break in the seminar. And when I finished the story, a lady stood up. I had a class of about 40, 50 people. She stands up. She said, "Mr. Rohn, could I say something?" And I thought we'd been going quite a while, and she just wanted to stand up and leave and excuse herself. And she said, "Could I say something?" And I said, "Well, yes." And she looked a little sort of shaken. I said, "Yes, of course." She turned around to the group and she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just had a unique experience." She said, "This story that Mr. Rohn told you about this murder trial down in Houston, Texas, some 15 years ago. She said, I want you to know the experience I've had in listening to the story has been unique because I was there." She said, the attorney that turned down the case, a pretty famous attorney, she said, he happened to be my boss. I was his legal secretary. I also sat in that courtroom. I want you to know, Mr. Rohn has described to you exactly what happened. And I thought, wow. Close, right? I'm asking you, right? Tell accurate stories. Deal in truth, because you never know when 15 years later somebody's going to be sitting in your audience. Okay. But learn to trust the truth. There's nothing more powerful than the truth. I got an ancient quote for you. Here's what it is. The truth will set you free. That's what sets you free. The truth. Many people are dealing in affirmations, but I'll tell you what sets you free. The truth. The best thing to affirm is the truth. If you're broke, best thing to affirm is, I am broke. That's what you put up on the refrigerator. It's the truth that sets you free. Right? When you're shaving in the morning, gentlemen, if you're broke, you just put that up there. I'm broke. There's nothing better to set you free than the awesome facts, the truth. So deal in truth. Affirmation without discipline leads to delusion. And the discipline and the accuracy of knowing your situation. You say, well, that's a bit negative. You've got to deal somewhat in negativity. If you've got something fairly wrong with your heart, looks like you're going to need a major operation, how many x-rays do you want them to take to find out what's really wrong? Somebody says, oh, just take one and see if we catch it. You say, no, not my heart. How many x-rays do you want them to take? It's kind of a negative subject, taking x-rays. How many? As many as it takes to find the full extent of the facts called the negative problem. So best to state the truth. Now we can deal with truth. Now we can deal with the problem if we accurately state it and we take an x-ray that shows it in all of its insidiousness. Now we can go after it and we can effect a cure. Now we can start the positive treatment. But at first, you got to know the problem before you can find the answer. So dealing in truth, so important. It sets you free. Next in the list of key things to remember in the art of persuasion, I've got down here quotes. You might as well borrow somebody else's good language. If they've said it extremely well and you can use it to illustrate a point, just borrow it. I borrow everything I can borrow. All the stuff Mr. Schoaf taught me, I borrow all that. Try my best to give him credit for all the things he shared with me. But borrow. Some people have said it so well, there's no use trying to think up another way to say it. Quotes. It shows you've done your homework. It shows you're passionately interested in your subject. The quotes, the stories. In some other seminars I give, I use a lot of quotes. I'm talking about humans being affected by each other, and I quote the lyrics from a recent song that says, if not for you, the winter would hold no spring, couldn't hear a robin sing, I just wouldn't have a clue if not for you. Now see, that's so well said, you couldn't improve much on that. So the key is to just borrow all that you can borrow to support your argument, to express your heart, or to express your mind and your feelings. This is part of the art of persuasion, learning to borrow things well said and well constructed. Winston Churchill said, the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, and ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. See, that's so well said. You could stay up all night and not think of that. Right? But you don't have to stay up all night and think of it, right? Churchill's already said it. But it's so powerful and it's so brief and it's so precise and it's so dramatic that you might as well borrow the drama that comes from the language just by exercising the quote. I talk about the brevity of life in one of my other lectures. The Beatles wrote, "Life is so short." What a powerful lyric from one of their songs. And for John on the streets of New York, it was extra short. But see, those are powerful words. Elton John sings, "She lived her life like a candle in the wind." Wow, you can't think of much better lyrics to describe how fragile life is and how brief it is. Right? Those are unique words, and the key is to learn the words and borrow the quotes to support your expressions, your communication, your conversations. Benjamin Disraeli said, "Nothing can resist a human will that will stake its existence on its purpose." Wow, that's powerful. We call this towering language. We call this climbing the summit of words and sentences and phrases that have incredible meaning, so briefly said and yet so powerfully done. And you might as well borrow the power and borrow the explanation and borrow the effect of somebody else's unique words. Just borrow those and put them into your presentation. You'll see the dramatic difference right away. John Kennedy said, Winston Churchill had the ability in World War II to take the English language and send it into battle. And we were all inspired by the speeches, rallied to the cause, the tenacity to hang on, the visions of the rascal Hitler and his insidious, casting a long shadow over the land of Europe. Churchill had the ability to use the language to get us to see and to get us to think and to stir the mind and stir the heart and stir the soul. I'm telling you, words are so powerful. And think up words of your own that are powerful, but when you need it, reach and borrow somebody who has said it well and offer it for somebody to consider, to touch the heart and touch the soul and mend the problem and get somebody to decide, to try, to move, to change, to grow. Of course, this isn't an easy task. It wasn't meant to be easy. It was meant to be a price, because that's how you appreciate the promise of language, the language that affects the cure, the language that reaches and touches. You've got to go through some of these skills, learn the craft. Now, I've got another word down here you might not have that much use for. It's called oratory. Oratory is a dramatic way of saying something to catch someone's attention, to drive the point home. And you may not have that much use for oratory. I probably use more oratory informally than I do in public. I'm a little more reserved on the platform behind a podium. I get a little more dramatic in person. It's just my style. A little more conservative in public, a little more dramatic in person. But I do have a bit of oratory. One of my lectures, I'm dealing with the problem of complaining. I go through a whole list called the diseases of attitude. And when I get to the last one, complaining, I'm wanting to really make it clear. And I say, spend 5 minutes complaining and you have wasted 5. And you may have begun what's known as economic cancer of the bone. They will soon haul you off into a financial desert and there let you choke on the dust of your own regret. Now, that's what we call a bit of oratory, right? Oratory. Just a burst, right? Now, you can't do 30 minutes of that, right? That'd be too much. But when the occasion calls for it, oratory, saying something in a more dramatic fashion. Here's the next one. This is very important in dealing in the art of persuasion. Straight talk. I don't think any of us mind anymore, do we, in saying, let's tell it like it is. Doesn't almost everybody make the comment, level with me? Tell it like it is. Put it on the line. And that was one of the great experiences I had in meeting this incredible gentleman, Mr. Schoaf, when I was 25 years old. Mr. Schoaf only went to the 8th grade in school, so he put things in very simple language. But I tell you what he did do. He laid it on the line. He said, Mr. Rohn, if you're 25 years old and you're an American male and you've been to high school and 1 year of college and you're not at least a third of your way towards your fortune, he said, isn't something wrong? Now, see, I'd never looked at it like that before. As being wrong, he said, something's wrong, right? And he said, there's nothing wrong with the country and nothing wrong with the companies and there's nothing wrong with the banks and the money, but there's something wrong with your plan. There's nothing wrong with you, but there's something wrong with your thinking, something wrong with your plan. You bought the wrong story. You bought the wrong formula. And it's easy to wind up a nice person and broke. It's easy to wind up sincere and poor. I'm telling you, you can be sincere and poor, and you can work hard and be poor if you buy the wrong formula, buy the wrong plan. You didn't add up the percentages. You never took out the calculator. You never counted the cost, as an ancient phrase says. Now, see, that kind of blunt, straight language really helped to uncover where my problem lied. Let me give you one of the most clear formulas he gave me that helped to change my life. We deal in what we call basics in one of my lectures. Basics, fundamentals. And there's just a few fundamentals. And there aren't any new fundamentals. You've got to beware of somebody who says, I got a new fundamentals. And no, fundamentals are old. You've got to be suspicious of a guy that says, we're manufacturing antiques. You say, no, you don't manufacture antiques. Come on. Here's one of the greatest of basics and fundamentals. It comes from an ancient Bible phrase. Here's what it says. Whatever you sow, you will reap. We call it simply the law of sowing and reaping. Right? Simply put, the law of sowing and reaping. Now then, Mr. Schoaf said to me, Mr. Rohn, there's another way to quote this law that may very well help to discover where the problem lies. I said, okay, I'm ready. Here's what he said. It's also quoted like this. Whatever you reap is what you've sown. I thought, wow, I never thought about that. Now there went my list of all the things I blamed for my current circumstances. If you don't like the crop, who do you look up? Answer, whoever planted it. And where do you find who planted your crop? Answer, in the mirror. That's where you go come fall, come harvest time. You go to the mirror, and if necessary, you say, a few skinny carrots? I got to be unimpressed. Where were you last spring? Asleep. Didn't you read the books? Did you break your hoe? Now, we call this straight. This is talking straight. This is telling it like it is. I asked the question last night, am I reading enough books or am I not? If I engage in my current financial practices, will it take me toward the fortune I would wish for in the next 10 years or will it not? If I keep up my current health practices, will I have the vitality and the health and the vigor to do all the things I want to do 5 years from now? Will I or won't I? Are my current practices taking me where I would really like to go, or have I been kidding myself for quite some time? I had a day just before I met Mr. Schoaf called, Do Not Kid Myself Anymore Day. Here's where I am after 25 years. Here's what I've got. There's no use Mickey Mousing with the numbers. There's no use trying to stretch it. There's no use trying to excuse it. There's no use trying to paint it some phony color. Let's tell it like it is. Because it's the truth that starts the freedom mechanism working. It's the truth that starts to relieve the mind of all the guilt and all the excuses and get right down to where it is. When I finally discovered that the government wasn't my problem and that prices weren't my problem and that it wasn't the company and it wasn't company policy and it wasn't my negative relatives and it wasn't the weather and it wasn't the economy and it wasn't the community, when I finally discovered it was me, we call that trauma. Now, after I had passed through the trauma of discovering that it was me and not all the other things I'd blamed all those years, when I finally went through the trauma, now suddenly it dawned on me, hey, if it's me, I can do something about that right away. And then I started getting excited after my trauma had passed. See, if it's the government, I don't give you much chance. If it's prices, I don't give you much hope. If it's other people, I don't give you much of a chance, because I'm telling you, it probably isn't going to change. It's going to be about like it's always been, right? Opportunity mixed with difficulty. So if all those things are going to remain in place the next few years, which I imagine they will, the only change that is really going to dramatically affect your life is you. Mr. Shove said to me, Mr. Rohn, if it isn't going well for you, you don't say, what's wrong out there? You say, what's wrong in here? There's a black heritage spiritual that says, it's not my mother nor my father. It's not my brother nor my sister. It's me. What a revelation. But once you find out it's you, that's something you can go to work on this very day. You can start to make a new stretch today. You can start reading some new books today. You can sign up for some new classes today. You can start engaging in constructive thinking today. You can make some life-changing decisions today. See, you don't ever have to be the same again after this evening, only by choice. And while you wait for prices to come down, and while you wait for the outside to change, I would go to work immediately and quickly on the refinement of your own thinking and the refinement of your own disciplines, and watch how quickly the equity of that starts to grow. Now, this is called dealing in straight talk. When a father who's 40 and broke living in this country finally discovers when his children say, Daddy, how come we're not rich? If he wants to speak the truth finally, he says, I'll tell you why. I smoked it. I spent it in small daily pieces. And I didn't know it was going to mount up to be a fortune over the last 20 years. To be honest with you, I spent our fortune on non-essentials. Somehow they got to me with all the trinkets, and I didn't know what a price it was going to pay. We call this dealing in truth, straight talk. Tell it like it is. Okay? Next, in the art of persuasion, challenge. Challenge. We all respond to a challenge. I don't know a normal human being that doesn't respond to a challenge. From the time we were small, how high can you jump? How fast can you run? How much can you do? Can you win? Right? We all respond to a challenge. So part of the art of persuasion is challenge. Here's one of the greatest challenges Mr. Shoaff gave me. He said, let's go do it. That's the great challenge. Not you go do it, let's go do it. Boy, it's easy to say you go do it. You go change your life, you go be successful, you go make the decisions. But how much better if somebody comes along and says, let's go do it. Let's read the extra books, let's make the decisions, let's pour it on. For the next 6 months, let's go full speed 110% and see what comes of that. Boy, what an inspiring thing when somebody says, let's go do it. That's the greatest of challenge. Let's. But life is a challenge. What else is new? It is so important to articulate the challenge, the press, the push, because the push is on. But that's what life is all about, accepting the challenge, driving the roots deep, becoming as strong as possible, accepting everything that comes and making it into what you wish to make it, attempting your best, trying your hardest, thinking well, reading well, living well, struggling with it all. That's called the challenge. But that's what makes life worthwhile. That's where the value is. The struggle for high ideals to make something unique out of your life. I don't know how better to put it. That's it, the challenge. Now, here's the last part in the art of persuasion. The word is passion. Some new books just written. A passion for excellence. Passion is the emotion. Unique thing about emotions. Emotions is what gives us the drive. Emotions is the spirit. Emotions is the life. It isn't just knowledge that makes you wealthy. It's knowledge mixed with feelings and attitudes and emotions. The surge of feelings and emotions. But here's the key. Our emotions need to be educated. We've got to send emotions to school. We call civilization the intelligent management of human emotions. You've got to have the drive. Without the power, you don't get anywhere. But now we've got to have the power well educated and well directed. But that's what it takes in the final art of persuasion, putting yourself into the picture. Passion, emotion, beliefs, convictions. If you can learn to articulate those well, if you'll learn to let that flow, not just from the surface, but from down deep, from a lifetime of experience, if you'll draw from all of those feelings and commitments and awareness, even with some misgivings, even with not knowing it all, even with a sense of humility, but it's that flow of emotion that finally now seals the point in the final art of persuasion, when people have picked up the essence that you really believe and are committed to what you've been talking about, and that's why you laid it on the line. That's why you borrowed every quote you could borrow. That's why you said it as well as you could say it. That's why you told every story you could. That's why you used yourself front and center. It's because you so passionately believe in the moment and what you're trying to accomplish in the way of decision-making in touching somebody else's life. Now, how good can you get at all of this, the art of persuasion? Probably one of the best illustrations I can give you is an ancient Bible story. I'm an amateur on the Bible, but there's some neat stories. One is so dramatically told, it bears repeating. It says, King Agrippa was advised one day that he had a famous man in his prison. And they came and said, "Oh, Agrippa, we have got the man you've been wanting for a long time. We've got him locked up in your dungeon." And King Agrippa knew who the man was. He was the great leader of the early Christians, formerly known as Saul from Tarsus, now known as Paul, apostle, leader of the early Christians. And Agrippa has been brought this incredible news that this man is in his dungeon. I'm sure Agrippa said, "You don't mean the man himself." They said, "O king, we have got the man." Agrippa evidently had studied this whole Christian movement and had watched it grow. And evidently he knew a lot about the man. And he said, "Bring him to me. I got to see the man in person." So they hauled him out of the dungeon and stood this man in front of the king. And the king took one look at Paul and said, "Paul, I've heard all about you. Unfortunately, you find yourself in my dungeon, but what is going on here? What is this Christian movement? Why are all these people willing to give their lives for this incredible cause and willing to sacrifice? And it's growing like a prairie fire, spreading like wildfire." He said, "What's going on here? What is happening? What is this Christian thing? What about you?" And Agrippa said, "Tell me your story." He shouldn't have asked. Right? One more time. With eloquence to spare. And if you're a good reader of drama and stories, this is one of the most important ones to read in all of literature and history. He gave the greatest example of somebody who knew how to use the language to tell his story. And he went through and told his story. He said, "I used to hate the Christians. I was known as Saul from Tarsus. And then one day I'm making it for Damascus. This great light shines out of heaven, knocks me flat, grinds my face in the dirt, and blinds me for 3 days." He told the story with eloquence and precision and drama. And then he said, "I was finally persuaded to be a Christian, became a leader, and now the people I hated I now love." He went through the whole scenario, and he wrapped up his presentation to King Agrippa by saying, "O king, I only now have one request." And Agrippa said, "Pray tell, what is that?" And the great man said, "My request is, I wished you were just like me. I wish you had what I got, except for these chains. I don't wish these chains on you, but for the change, not the chains. If you could see what I can see, if you could have what I've got, that would be my greatest wish." What an occasion. What a chance for eloquence. What a chance for precision of language. What a chance to relate your experiences and pull from the past and relate it to the future and bring it to the drama of the present. And when he finished his story, the story says the king did send him back to the dungeon, but before he sent him back, he did look squarely at the man and say, "I must admit, sir, you have almost persuaded me to be a Christian." What a drama. What an occasion. So how good can you get at this art of persuasion and communication? Well, you might get so good, you might have a chance to persuade the king. Let alone anybody else between you and the king. They won't have a chance. All right. Communications touching people with words. One more formula in touching people with words. It's going to be 20% what you know, 80% how you feel. So I'm asking you to work on knowledge. But the greatest of skills is to work on the precision of emotions, feelings, commitment, passion for the cause, for the occasion, to solve a problem, to touch somebody truly with spirit as well as mind, with heart as well as words. The key is to be attractive. We come back to the central theme of all of my lectures. Here's what I start with. The major part of your world starts with you. Mr. Schoaf gave me, in dramatic fashion, one of the major keys that changed my life. Here's what he said: work harder on yourself than you do on your job. That simple statement started to make measurable changes in my life in a fairly short period of time. I had discovered up until age 25, I had worked hard on my job, but not on myself. And that was my reason for lack of progress. Now, when it comes to be a leader, the same thing applies. If you really want to attract attractive people, if you'd like to have people of quality around you, the key is to become a person of quality. Leadership, the ability to attract someone to the gifts and skills, opportunities to be around you as a manager, as a parent. I call leadership the great challenge of the 80s in a wide variety of areas: science and politics, and industry and education, sales, and here's a major one: parents. Sometimes parents don't see themselves as leaders, but it is the greatest chance for influence as a parent. I call leadership the challenge to be something more than mediocre, the step up to the new challenge, the new opportunity. It was said of Abraham Lincoln, he was at his mother's bedside when she died, and her last words were, "Be somebody, Abe." And if that story is true, evidently he took it to heart and proceeded from that moment to become somebody. And that's the key to leadership: inner inspection of your gifts and your skills, your integrity and your character. The outer look at how you present yourself as you appear. In some of our other lectures, we go through this whole scenario. The inside is important, but also the outside is important. When you meet somebody for the first time, first thing they're going to do is take a look. Now, sure, they're going to listen, but then they're going to take a look. Now, certainly we learn to evaluate people by more than what we see, but at first we're going to take a look. Let me quote you an ancient phrase. It says, people look on the outside, God looks on the inside. Isn't that excellent information? That's excellent information. So that might mean work on the inside for God, work on the outside for people. You say, well, people shouldn't judge you by your appearance. Well, let me give you a clue. They do. They do. You can't deal in shoulds and shouldn'ts. You got to deal in realities. Now, when people get to know you, they'll judge you by more than what they see, but at first, it's all they got to go by is what they see and what they hear. Now, sure, there's more to come, but at first, you got to pass the show-up test, the challenge to be somebody. Let me just give you a brief list. Be somebody wise. There's no substitute for smart. Threats don't make up for smart, right? Volume and shouting doesn't make up for smart. There's no substitute for smart. Be somebody strong. Strength is attractive. And there are many ways to be strong: decision-making, character, language, right? As well as vitality and health. There's a lot of strengths, and they're all attractive. But let me give you now the refinement of leadership skills. Here it is. Learn to be strong but not rude. This is refinement. These are the extra steps to become a powerful, capable leader with wide range of reach. Some people mistake rudeness for strength. It's not even a good substitute. Next, be kind but not weak. We must not mistake weakness for kindness, because kindness isn't weak. Kindness is a certain kind of strength. We must be kind enough to tell somebody the truth. We must be kind enough and considerate enough to lay it on the line. We must be kind enough to tell it like it is and not deal in delusions. That's a sense of kindness. Not weakness, but kindness. Next, learn to be bold, but not a bully. It does take boldness to win the day, to become a leader. You got to stride out front. You got to be willing to take first arrows. You got to be willing to take first problem, first trouble, leading the way. You must boldly seize the spring. Farming is not an easy task. You must press the seeds into the soil. I think all of us would relate farming to hard work. It's hard work. Planting the seed, letting it grow, defending it against all of the encroachments of bugs and weeds. We call it not an easy task, but that's one of the best illustrations I know of life. If you want any value at all come harvest, you gotta press, you gotta be bold, you got to seize it. The high life is not for the timid and the shy. Here's the next one, be humble but not timid. Some people mistake timidity for humility. But humility is a virtue. Timidity is a disease. It's a malady. It's an affliction. Now, it can be cured, but it is a problem. But humility is a almost godlike word, a sense of awe, a sense of wonder, a sense of dimension, a sense of understanding the distance in worth and value, an awareness of the human soul, the spirit, something unique about the human drama versus the rest of life. Humility is a grasp of the distance between us and the stars, and yet having the feeling that we're part of the stars. Next, be thoughtful but not lazy. It's okay to dream, but we must not just become a dreamer. Here's a good refinement. Be proud but not arrogant. It takes pride to win the day. It takes pride in company, philosophy, opportunity. It takes pride in community, school. It takes pride in group, organization. It takes pride in cause and accomplishment. But the key is to be proud without being arrogant. Do you know the worst kind of arrogance? Arrogance from ignorance. It's hardly tolerable, right? Next, deal in realities. Deal in truth. Save yourself the agony. Just accept it like it is. Life is fairly unique. Accept it as unique. Now, best to call it unique. Some people call it tragic, but it's best to call it unique. The black widow spider eats her mate after he's finished his noble task. Now, some people would call that awful. I think it's more important to call it unique. Unique. That's unique. The whole drama of life is unique. Right? The Bible is one of the most fascinating books to read because it is so unique in its presentation. One story says, God and Satan were chatting away one day. Now, see, I wouldn't have thought that. Isn't that unique? And they're chatting away, and looking down on what's going on the earth. Now, see, that's unique. I thought, how often do they get together and chat and talk about all this stuff? I don't know. But the drama of the story is absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's unique. And on this particular occasion, the story says, God got to bragging about one of his favorite people, Job. And he got to saying, Job, he's my favorite friend. Job, he's the greatest, he's the richest, he's the most powerful, and I'm taking good care of my friend Job. And he kept saying, Job. And finally, Satan got it up to here with Job. And he said, yeah, God, Job, your special friend. You've got this wall built around him. I can't get to him in my normal fashion. And God said, well, he's a special friend of mine. Right? We got this thing going. So I'm taking good care of him. Now, this conversation is going on. I find that fascinating. I find it unique. And finally, in the scenario of the story, Satan says to God, I tell you what, God, if you were to take that special wall of protection down from around your special friend, and if you were to let me at him, I promise you in a short period of time, doing my specialty, he will curse you to your face and then die. God said, you're out of your mind. He would never do that. Not my special friend. Satan said, would you like to wager? Wow. Isn't that fascinating? God says, interesting question. I wonder what Job would do. Now, see, Job doesn't know this is going on. Isn't that fascinating? That's a fascinating story. Finally, according to the scenario of the story, unbelievable, God went for the bet. And he had just one requirement. He said, just one thing. Satan said, what's that? God said, well, you can't kill him. Because he's my special friend. Satan said, okay, I don't need to kill him. But you just take the wall down, let me do my number, and I promise you he will curse you. God said, no way. Satan said, I will do it. And the bet is on. Isn't that fascinating? That's fascinating. According to the terms of the wager, God did as he was required by the wager, and he took the wall down from around his special friend. And when he did, according to the story, Satan did one of his all-time famous numbers on the man. First, took his family. Second, took his wealth, destroyed him. And blow 3, took his health. That's called triple blow. Your family, your fortune, and your health. In one of the last scenes, Job is sitting on the ashes with everything gone, and he is scraping his sores with a rock. And his wife comes along, and she's observed all of this scenario, God forsaking his special friend Job. And she said to Job, it looks like your friend has forsaken you. Why don't you just curse him and die? Satan said to God, here's where it happens. God says, he hasn't talked yet. Isn't that fascinating? That's fascinating. While they both watch, wondering the outcome of this wager, Job says, from his ashes, never. I will never curse my friend. God said, I knew it. I knew it. And he picks up the bet. 10-1 or whatever it was. I don't know. It doesn't say what the wager was. Isn't that fascinating? Now, the rest of the story says God did make it up to his friend, Job. And when you play these kind of games, you do have to make it up. So, let's see, what shall I do? I know what I'll do. I'll just give Job twice of everything he had before. Wow. And Job became, according to history, one of the richest, most powerful men in the known world. But isn't that a fascinating scenario? Don't you find that fascinating? Now, it may be a bit frustrating, but we learn to turn frustration into fascination, right? And you just give up on a lot of this trying to figure it out and say, that's one of those things. It's a fascinating thing. I used to say, liars shouldn't lie. See, we call that wasted energy. Why would you deal in such Mickey Mouse pronouncements, right? Liars are supposed to lie. That's what they're supposed to do. That's why we call them liars. Lie. You wouldn't expect them to do anything else. Lie to say, liars shouldn't lie. We call you naive. And we especially call you naive if it upsets you, instead of finding it fascinating. Right? Somebody cuts you off on the freeway. You go chasing them down the freeway and shaking your fist. Hey, save yourself. They say they shouldn't cut you off on the freeway. Hey, hold on, hold on. That's what they're supposed to do. They're known as cutter-offers on the freeway. And if you say, those people shouldn't cut you off, we call you naive, naive. Come on. Here's some stuff that saved me a lot of agony and a lot of anguish and a lot of sleepless nights I used to go through and pulling my hair and wondering. I gave up on all that when I finally understood the 80-20 rule. Let me give some good clues on the 80-20 rule. As a leader, as a manager, being able to influence other people in this 80-20 group, here are some clues. Learn to spend 80% of your time as a leader with the 20%. For maximum efficiency and productivity, this is part of the key. Since it's going to be 80-20, and there's plenty of examples to show that it's 80-20, not exactly, but fairly close. Ask the minister of the church, who picks up the tab here? And he'll say, probably, 20% of the people pick up 80% of the tab. I mean, this is called one of those things, okay? So what do? Well, you learn to work with it and not try to solve it. It's like trying to solve the seasons. You don't solve the seasons, you learn to work with the seasons. They're all set. And some of these things by history are all set. The key is to learn to work with the way it is set. So part of the key of leadership is learning to spend 80% of your time with the 20% because they're doing the 80%. We would call that good leadership sense. Now you say, well, how do you do that? Let me give you part of the answer in how to do that. Here it is. Spend individual time with the 20% and group time with the 80%. This is part of the answer to leadership skills. However, guess who wants your individual time? The wrong group. But that's what life's all about, right? Accepting this challenge. So now you've got to be what we call clever. And you've got to be, another key word, diplomatic. Diplomacy and strategy are two key words for leadership to understand. Diplomacy and strategy. Here's part of the diplomacy. Mary comes and says, I've got a question. You say, Mary, bring your question Saturday morning. I'm going to meet with everybody, and I'll cover it then. She says, okay. Now, it might not be that easy. But if you start trying to put this in perspective now, groups, you can deal with the 80% by groups, and you can talk to the 20% individual. Now, the pull is in the opposite direction, and it always is. Gravity is the downward pull. Life is the struggle in the opposite direction of gravity. It's downward pull. Life is moving in the opposite direction of the normal negative. Now somebody says, well, I'll just fire the 80%. They're only doing 20% of the business. Well, I wouldn't fool with that. Because after you've fired the 80%, before too long, whoever is left, 20% of them will be doing 80% of the business, and 80% will be doing 20%. Right? This is not something you fire. This is something you learn to work with. The 80-20 rule, very important rule. Now, let me give you some other clues to understanding ratios and numbers, categories in this challenge of leadership. The next subject is called the law of averages. The law of averages. So important to understand the law of averages. The law of averages in a personal sense is very simple. Here's what it says. If you do something often enough, you'll get a ratio of results. It's important for leaders to understand ratios. Because if you're working with people, you got to have some charts. You got to know ratios. You got to be able to evaluate your own performance, their performance. Ratios. What do we mean by ratios? Well, let's say you're in sales, you join a company, and you start representing the product or the service. And you're first getting started, you talk to 10 people. 9 say, no, I wouldn't care for any. 1 says, yes, I'll take some. We call this your opening ratio. Now, 1 out of 10, it all depends on what you're involved with, whether or not that's a good ratio or a poor ratio. You say, well, that's not too good a ratio. Well, it all depends. Okay? But it's your opening ratio. So at first, you don't worry about what the numbers are. At first, you just get some activity going. Now, we call this very simply 1 out of 10. Now, here's what's very exciting about dealing in ratios. Once a ratio starts, it tends to continue. Now, this is some things leadership needs to know so that you're not frustrated. If you talk to 10 people, 1 says yes. If you talk to 10 more, chances excellent, you'll get another one. If you talk to 10 more, chances excellent, you'll get another one. It's uncanny. I don't even know how it works. All I know is it works. There's a lot of things you don't need to know how they work. Just work them. Right? A lot of people are studying the roots. Others are gathering the fruit. I mean, it depends on what end of this you want to get in on. It just works. It's a fascinating subject, the law of averages. Okay? Now, once you know that your ratio pretty well is in there, 1 out of 10, now you can start to compete. It is so important to compete, to test your skill against someone else's skill. What someone else can do is a pretty good insight in if you stretch what you might be able to do. So competition is a very healthy thing. Now, you've got to be very smart here. If you've been with this company, let's say a long time, and you've been there so long, you're so good, you can get 9 out of 10, and I just joined and I can only get 1 out of 10, If we have a 30-day contest as to who can get the most to say yes to our product or service, if we have a 30-day contest, you and me, even though I can only get 1 out of 10, I will win. You say, well, I've been here a long time, I can get 9 out of 10. How could you possibly beat me? It would be very simple. Now, it might not be easy, but it would be very simple. During the 30 days, since I understand now these ratios, during the month, while you talk to 10 and get 9, I will talk to 100 and get 10. So that at the end of 30 days, you got 9, I got 10, I beat you. Isn't that clever? Let me give you a scenario here. If you're bright, what you do if you're new, you make up in numbers what you lack in skill. This is called helping people with the numbers, helping people with ratios. Someone says, well, I can only get 1 out of 10. Say, that's got nothing to do with competition. Now, after 30 days, I may be fairly exhausted. But see, I'm pretty good for a 30-day run. One is I don't sleep much for 30 days. About 4 hours sleep is all I need. For 30 days. Now, I got to back off after 30 days, I'll admit that. But for 30 days, I can go on 4 hours sleep. Now, see, it's hard to beat somebody that won't sleep. How are you going to beat somebody? About 1 hour a day for nutrition. That's all I need. 1 meal a day, 1 hour a day for nutrition. In 30 days, how are you going to beat somebody that won't eat? Won't eat, won't sleep. The answer is, it's hard. It's hard, even if they're new. But if the new person is so clever to make up in numbers what they first lack in skill, I'm telling you, you can compete even though you're new. The key is to be bright enough to understand ratios. Here's the next clue. Ratios can be increased. You talk to 10, get 1, talk to 10, get 1, talk to 10, get 1, talk to 10 more, get 2. Why would about the 4th time you talk to 10, you get 2 instead of 1? You're getting better. Key question, who can get better? Answer, anybody who tries. All you got to do is put together the numbers. Right? Your brain is as good as anybody else's. Your chances are as good. All you got to do is find a way to put out the extraordinary effort to do an ordinary thing extremely well. Ratios. Success is a numbers game. It's important to keep track of your numbers. In baseball, we call it batting average. Whatever you're doing, the key is to keep track of your success and how good you are at whatever. Someone says, well, I'm not very good on the telephone. I'll tell you how you can quickly cure all that, is get on the telephone. I'm telling you, you can get better at anything. All you've got to do is attempt it and try it and start putting a string of numbers together and keeping track and understand your own ratios. I teach a very simple sales course. Let me give it to you in 3 points. Number 1, talk to lots of people every day. It's a simple sales course. Number 1, talk to lots of people. Isn't that simple? It's a numbers game, especially if you're new. And here's what's exciting. There's lots of people. You don't have to worry about people. So just talk to lots of people, even if your presentation is very poor. If you put the numbers together, I'm telling you, something will happen. If your presentation was so poor, you went around every day saying to everybody you could meet, you wouldn't want to buy anything, would you? Sure enough, somebody's going to say, well, maybe I would. What are you selling? I'm telling you, it's just about that simple. If you put the numbers together, if you talk to lots of people every day, 2 things will happen. Number 1, you're bound to make sales. I'm telling you, some people buy for the strangest reasons. Hey, some people buy out of sympathy for the salesperson. I'm telling you, you can find some people that'll buy out of sympathy. They don't want to see your kids starve. I'm telling you, if you'll talk to enough people, some people will buy out of sympathy. So part of success is, look pitiful to enough people, right? I'm telling you, somebody will buy. And why? Why? It's because of ratios. It's because of numbers. Now, you can have a much better presentation than you wouldn't want to buy anything, would you? You can get a little brighter than that. But if you start just that simple, it's simple. Someone says, where do you start? Anywhere. It doesn't matter. If you're in sales, walk outside, find you a rock, throw it up in the air. Wherever the rock comes down, start right there. That's a good place to start. Anywhere. The next person you see, say, sir, you're the first man after the rock. And that'll get a conversation started. I'm telling you. They may back up while they talk, but something will start. And the reason is understanding the numbers. The numbers, you don't have to be so cleverly skillful. All you got to do is be bright enough to understand that numbers can make up for lack of skill to begin with. And if you're in a leadership position to help people, help them with their ratios. Say, John, let's go over these numbers one more time. How many calls? Who did you talk to? Okay. So that's my sales form. It's very simple. Number one, talk to lots of people every day. You're bound to get better. You're bound to find somebody. Number two, be real nice. When the weather isn't, be real nice when people aren't. A big part of presentation is attitude, personality. And third is simple. Give good service. Write all the notes most people don't write. Do all the extra things most people don't do. Call them before they call you. Service leads to multiple sales. If you'll take good care of somebody, they'll open doors you could never open yourself. They'll take you by the hand and share you with people that you never thought you could reach. But I'm still an amateur. But there's a unique story in the Bible. It's called the parable or the story of the sower. S-O-W-E-R. The sower in the ancient days was the person that planted the crops. Very simply. They got the ground ready, and the sower with a bag of seed would walk across the ground, sow the seed. That's how they got the crops going. And it's a very fascinating story, and it's got a lot to say, and it's got a lot to say about our subject called the law of averages. There's some important points you'll pick up right away when you read the story. Here's number one. The sower was a wise man. A great advantage. Right? They didn't send a dummy out to plant. Number two, he was very ambitious. And by the time you finish the story, you'll come to the conclusion he was ambitious. Admirable quality. Ambition. Now that has to be tempered. One writer said, I've learned to be both ambitious and content. That's a unique place to finally arrive, to be both ambitious and content. But this story says the sower was very ambitious. Nothing wrong with ambition, as long as you work the right formula. The Bible probably gives the greatest formula for wealth and power. It says, be faithful over small amounts and we'll make you ruler over much. Good philosophy. Which teaches us, number one, I think it's okay to wish to be a ruler. Nothing wrong with that. But here's how you become a ruler. Good stewardship when the amounts are small. The guy says, oh, if I had a fortune, I'd take good care of it, but I've just got a paycheck, so I don't know where it goes. I say, no. When we really check your faithfulness is when the amounts are small. I said to Mr. Schoaf when I met him at age 25, I said, you know, if I had more money, I'd have a better plan. He said, Mr. Rohn, I would suggest to you, if you had a better plan, you'd have more money. It's not the amount that counts. It's the philosophy that executes your plan that counts. If a child has $1, what should he do with it? It's very important. It's going to determine the rest of his life, what he does with $1. You say, well, it's just a child and it's just $1. We call that massive errors in judgment. It's only a child and it's only $1. What a colossal mistake to make in analyzing. If a child is allowed to spend the whole $1 and they don't have the sense of where that could take them, we call that the greatest disservice to a child. Not to explain to them the journey and the road you select when you spend the whole $1. So if a child wants to spend the whole $1, you say, no, you can't spend the whole $1. Child says, why not? Say, well, let me show you why not. And you take him to the other side of town and say, would you like to live here? Here's where the people live that spend all they make. Here's where they live. There's nothing better than visual to illustrate to a child. Show them the tragic circumstances. If you spend all you make, if you spend all you've got. And kids will come home with their big wide eyes. Say, would you like to live here? Would you like to live like this? Kid says, no, I wouldn't want to live here. Then you can't spend the whole $1. Okay, back to my story. The sower was bright and he was also ambitious. Number 3, he went to work. It takes activity to furnish the labor that brings new life. Ideas without labor are stillborn. They never become tangible. They never become real. You got to put yourself through the activity, through the labor. So when you read the story, you'll find this was a hard-working sower. We call that admirable quality. Now, some interesting things that happened to the sower. It said he had excellent seed, point 4. He had the best. At least the scenario of the story says he had the best of seed. Boy, it's exciting when you feel that you're involved in the best product, the best service, the best idea, the best enterprise, something you feel proud about. Okay. But that's important, to have what you consider the best. Now, with all of these qualities, he starts out and now starts to unfold the scenario of life called the law of averages. Here's what happened. The sower goes out to sow the seed, and the first part of the seed that he sows falls by the wayside, and the birds get it. Now, I want you to understand the scenario. Here's what's very important for leaders to engage in: to teach the inevitable. It's very important to teach the inevitable. Key for leadership. Leaders must understand birds. Why? Birds are going to get part of the seed. It's called inevitable. And if you don't teach inevitability, people will be all upset. They won't know what to expect. We must all be prepared for what we call eventualities, the inevitable. So here's part of the scenario. The sower goes out to sow the seed, and the birds get some. He sows some more seed, and the birds get it. Now, this is a typical story of life. Is that fairly typical? Fairly typical. The birds are going to get some of the seed. Some of you building an organization, right? You're out recruiting. Say, John, I've got an important story for you to listen to. Could be the change of your life, earn some extra money, or make it a full-time venture, whatever. But come and take a look. And he says, well, I think I'm ready for something like that. Thursday night, I'll see you, and let's go through it all. You say, wonderful. Comes Thursday night. John isn't there. You say, where is John? The birds. The birds. The birds. Who knows what form they come in? I don't know. It's called the inevitable. The inevitable. His brother-in-law said, sales? You're not going to get mixed up in sales. Who told you you were a salesman? All kinds of stuff that talk people out of a good idea. I don't know. Now, when the birds get some of the seed, you got one of a couple of choices. Number one, you can chase birds. You say, well, I'll go straighten this out. Well, here's the problem if you go try chasing birds to straighten things out. You have now left the field. And the law of averages isn't going to work for you anymore till you get back to the field. This is so important to know. What to spend your time on and what not to waste your time on. There's two ways to have the tallest building in town. One is tear all the other buildings down. Right? Now yours is the tallest.